Kate Mila-Falcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. It's time for our Saturday book, and we finished that epic book about Marilyn Monroe last week, and I thought we'd return to some themes that we've pursued in the past and something completely different, an entirely different kind of cosmos. You're all familiar, I'm sure, with the books we've covered by Paul Wallis. This is the next in the series, The Eden Conspiracy, Ancient Memories of ET Contact and the Bible Before God. One of the really interesting things about Paul Wallis's books is that as you go through the different books in the series, you kind of slowly he unfolds his own personal evolution and spiritual evolution. And also his books are a little bit like the World Book Encyclopedia, if anybody remembers the World Book. It's organized in a really interesting way. So let's say you're going to look up the Garden of Eden. That's a perfect example. And the first paragraph or so will just be very basic facts, and it's written in a very simple primary kind of way so that if you're a grade school student you can understand what they're talking about. And then the next few paragraphs, it's a little bit more sophisticated in language and in information, but not a lot. By the time you get to the end of it, it's almost high school, college level, and they often provide outlines and suggestions for outlines of the topic and suggestions for essays that you could write. Just a little FYI. So Paul Wallis, just to refresh everybody's memory, let me read it right off the back of the book. Researches the world's ancestral narratives for their insight into human origins and human potential. His documentaries on the Fifth Kind TV and the Paul Wallis channel are watched by millions worldwide. He's married, has 3 children, lives in Australia. He, for a very long time, decades, was not only a minister, but he taught other people to be a minister. Like he worked with, I guess you call them seminarians. I believe it's the Church of England or the Anglican. I should know that. And he did go to school, I think, in England and then is back in Australia. So just to give you a little context, let's move forward with this. This book was written in 2023, The Eden Conspiracy by Paul Wallis. The introduction and the first chapter are kind of put together, and it's entitled Meet Me in Brazil. So it's been a really long time since I took these notes and read this book, so this is all going to be new to me too. The book starts with him. Oh, yeah, I remember this story. He's on a hot bus in Brazil, traveling like a Greyhound bus kind of situation. And he's in 15 minutes into a 3-hour drive when a little girl sitting close by him vomits all over him. This is in the 1980s. He's taking a trip down memory lane. And why this is a significant event is that a group of the women on the bus helped him to take off his dirty clothes and his boots, which were just gross. And they had a bottle of water, which they gave him to rinse off what he could. They helped him wash up, and they helped him bag up his clothes and provided him, I guess, with something else. And he said, what a caring and intelligent community, how they jumped to his aid. They worked together, full of kindness. And he said he was just surrounded by this maternal, positive female energy. And he was young at the time, and he really made an impression on him. So he said he got off the bus, he's got a bag of vomiting clothes, and bare feet to meet his hosts. So he was there to witness the Corn Festival. This is an Indigenous festival, and his guide was a guy called Augusto. he said the whole town shuts down. It's a big, gigantic party. They have food stalls and music and dancing, very friendly crowd, lots of camaraderie. And he said this night actually was going to shake his whole Christian worldview, although he didn't know it going into it. That wasn't his intent. So this was actually a harvest festival celebrating corn, because that's a staple. And there's a procession, and they carried corn figurines, but they carried them into the cathedral. And there's incense and music and candles. So what he's observing is this joining together of two worldviews. And he said, tonight we thank the Queen of Heaven, this is the prayer, for the gift of corn, and without that gift, none of us would be alive. The Mass is familiar to him because he's at the time, okay, says right here, he's becoming an Anglican priest. Augusto is one of the seminarians, but he lives in Brazil, so he's associated with the same religious faith that Paul is being educated in, but he's doing it in Brazil. The trip that Paul is taking is for his degree. He's going to study and write about the evolution of organized Christianity in Brazil, and little did he know what trip this would be. Next morning, he's surprised when Augusto tells him that this was not a Catholic rite that he had witnessed. He said nothing outside the church building had anything to do with Roman Catholicism. Paul, is unfamiliar because he's Anglican. And he just sort of, anything that he didn't recognize, he wrote off as, well, they're Catholics. No, it was indigenous, and he hears the story. Thousands of years ago, the peoples in this village, their ancestors, were taught how to use corn. The gift of cultivation changed everything for them. The Queen of Heaven came from the sky to the earth with this gift for their ancestors. And they truly believe this is like actual. This is not just a myth in their eyes. It's an actual historical event from the past. He's told that the new pope doesn't like the harvest festival. Now, this is in the 1980s. So who was the pope then? Was it John Paul? Shame on me, right? Anyway, the new pope didn't like the harvest festival. He didn't like the corn figurines. Yeah, John Paul II. I wrote it down. He didn't like the songs and the dances, and he wanted it all to stop because it's not Catholic, it's pagan, in his words. And Augusto says, these are my ancestors. What's he talking about? You can't just dismiss that. He says, I'm going to read you this little tiny bit. Look at my neighbors, Paul. My ancestors are from the interior of the country. So they carry all the memory and rituals of our indigenous ancestors. Many of us have ancestors who came here from West Africa when the people were kidnapped and brought to Brazil, before it was Brazil, as slaves for sugar plantations. So our people also carried the memories and rituals from Africa. That's why in my family and in many families in this region, we still remember this amazing moment from thousands of years ago. We celebrate because it reminds us of who we are, where we came from, and how our ancestors became a civilization. Meanwhile, His Holiness, John Paul II, wants us to throw away our indigenous Amazonian heritage and throw away our African heritage. He wants our children to know only the European Catholicism that came from Portugal and to forget everything else. But many of the people here don't want to do that because it's our family heritage. It's about who we are. So Paul, his antennae went up, and he said that he started to notice that he heard a lot of talk amongst the people everywhere he went about the new pope cleaning up the Brazilian culture. That's actually the term that was used. The grassroots movements, the social movements for social welfare and justice were marginalized. They had been excluded and replaced with the priest's hierarchy. And there was a nascent peer-to-peer Christian community movement in the interior of Brazil and in many poor global areas, and it was being stifled by the institutionalized church. So the native people, the indigenous people, the local people had embraced the ideas of community care and loving one another from Christianity. But because they were taking agency over themselves, the institutionalized church was getting all offended because they were sidestepping the hierarchy. They leaving the priests and the bishops and all those guys out of it, basically. Paul saw these sociological and political issues, but at the time, he recognized what was going on socially, social ills, poverty, hunger, whatever, and the desire to grab control and from the leaders. He said, but he totally missed the cosmic implications. There are some really interesting issues here that he just didn't think of. He said the Amazonian indigenous and African traditions told a much older story than the Christian story. And he said this was a story about what's called the Great Leap Forward, the embracing of agriculture and growing, horticulture. Cultivation, rather than hunter-gathering, cultivation led to being able to amass a surplus of food. And when you have a surplus, not only are you better nourished and you have less instability, but you have time on your hands to dedicate to doing what essentially is building a civilization. You go from subsistence living to a specialized society. You're in one place. You have some people that are better at some things than at others, and so you soon find yourself living in an organized community situation where some people make pots and pottery, and some people weave cloth, and other people grow what needs to be grown. Other people take care of the animals, rather than this sort of gendered separation of men hunters, women gatherers, and wandering around, not having the kind of stability that staying in one place lends itself to. Now, there are ecological things we could talk about, but that's not the focus today. So they go to this specialized society, and this kind of evolution of a society to a sedentary agricultural community is really kind of necessary for further technological advancement. You need the time and the freedom to be able to pursue other things. So he said their story is that the Queen of Heaven gave them that great leap forward, kind of a gift from the cosmos to advance their evolution and sophistication of their living situation. And this is starting to percolate in his head, and he starts to compare this same story from other cultures, and he sees that this is kind of a global story. He said in Guatemala, they have, okay, I'm going to say all of this wrong, I apologize, but not only do I not know how to say it under the best of circumstances, but I can't read my handwriting. So, Guatemala, the Hunapu. In Greece, Aphrodite did the same thing. In Rome, it was Venus. In Babylon, it was Oannes and Apkallu. Mea culpa. The Mali people believed in Nomos. In Nigeria, it was Abase, and Atari. In South Africa, Mbab. Australia, he says there's a whole other mysterious layer in Australia, which he eventually talks about. But there are just a few similar stories globally about a female from the sky who brings down the knowledge of agriculture and creates a great leap forward in sophistication of community life and human technology. And it's ubiquitous, it's global, the details are different, the names are obviously different, but it's the same basic story. Some cultures are actually very specific about where this Queen of Heaven came from. Some say the stars, some say specifically the Pleiades, some say Sirius, and some, interestingly enough, say that she came from the oceans. But in all cases, they're extraterrestrial, using the word terrestrial just to mean like solid land, but also to mean the earth. They all believe that this was an entity from elsewhere. And this contact actually has a term. It's called Paleo-contact. It's also in the Bible, but a lot of people don't necessarily see it or interpret it that way or agree with it. But there are stories in the Bible that are open to interpretation. And he said that he didn't know this when he was a student. It took him a while to put two and two together. But the Bible talks about visitors from the sky, star visitors, that were our ancestors and that taught farming and helped to learn how to build villages and do civilization. He says today his work is actually uncovering and exploring these stories, collating them, getting them in one place, written down, understanding what the mythology or the traditional folklore is, and then looking for that intersection where they seem to tell the same narrative. And it's made him move from his role as a senior churchman, he was a big shot in the Anglican Church, to the front man, he says, for controversy and the front man for Close Encounters. And that's awkward. He's been called by George Norrie, the host of Coast to Coast, this generation's Chariots of the Gods. Van Doniken, right? So before he was, before all of this, sorry, I'm trying to read my handwriting. Before all of this, he was the archdeacon of the Anglican Church in Australia, which is a step just below the bishop. So he was big shot. Also, he was a theological educator. He trained pastors in the church history and how to interpret ancient texts, which is hermeneutics. Also, he's a linguist. And he had spent hours of interpretation on these ancient texts. And in the process of doing his job for the church, he became more and more aware of things that challenged him, and it became a journey, a whole journey. He said he lost friends, he lost money, he lost job opportunities. He said that it was his understanding when he finally got these stories collated in his mind, that the truth was, they attempted to erase the truth. We'll get to that. They attempted to erase the truth. He said people refer to the Bible as God's book, and he says he's now convinced it's about something else entirely. It is a collection of ancient stories that come from ancient civilizations from the Middle East, but these stories are very similar to other stories from other places, and they all tell a narrative of paleo-contact. However you want to interpret that, paleo means old, ancient. So we're talking about long time ago, human interaction with some larger entity. Interpretation depends on with whom you speak. So before it was edited, what did the Bible really say? Because we know that it was edited. I mean, there's no secret about that. They had several councils in the early Christian church, and they voted things in and out, and they decided which philosophers, church fathers that they would follow and which they wouldn't. What did it really say before they did that? What were the basics before it became a call for a meek and obedient monotheism? He says this book that he's writing, see, we're still in chapter 1, the introduction. This book explores the distorted transmission of the message from the Bible across the globe. Who are we as a species? What are we capable of? And the book, it contains secrets that were gifts of our ancestors. Lost truths are revealed if you care to open your eyes and look at it. So he's going to use linguistics to keep us grounded. And it's fascinating. Now, I did not get into some of the really, really down to the molecular level linguistics that he talks about, because we'd be here all day. It is really interesting, but it's also complicated and hard to synopsize. So I have glossed over some of it, but not so that you miss any of the important facts. And if you really want to get into the charts he made of comparing ancient Sumerian and ancient Greek, and it's very, very, similarities in tribal African languages and Sumerian. It's very, very, very interesting. So he used linguistics. He took clues from ancient languages, ancient meanings that are reflected across the globe, and they've seen some mistranslations, and they've been edited, they've been distorted intentionally sometimes, and he says this opened up for him a new world of lost memories. He felt like it was being revealed to him. So this festival in Brazil is ancient and indigenous, and it's the story of the origins of humankind according to this indigenous belief system. And he said, actually, what's really interesting, so he wrote this in 2023. He says, actually, this indigenous story from Brazil agrees with what the Pentagon said in 2021. And you can go back and, I'm not even going to get into that. I've gotten into that before, but the Pentagon revelations of meaning modern humans, specifically Americans, and specifically the American government and military, their interaction with what, just for ease, I'll call ETs, remarkable paradigm shifting information from the Pentagon, and it went over wah, wah, like, like a weather balloon. Anyway, the struggles between government censorship of information and for dominance over the people is really striking. He says everyone's trying to control the narrative for whatever reasons. He said he saw this firsthand in Brazil when he was a student in the 80s. He saw that happening then. He didn't know then that this cleanup had been going on long before the Roman Catholic Church was invented. So, power brokers, way before even Christianity, we're also using control to steer people's beliefs. He said John Paul II was not the first to try to delete ancestral memory. This was not his idea. This was actually very common. Chapter 2 is called Bread, Cakes, and Standing Stones. So a place called, what I love about his books is it moves around in time. They move around in time. They move around in location. It's a little trip down his memory lane. You're seeing him evolve in his understanding of this. And it's fascinating piecing together the different places and cultures that contributed. So he's in Tel Arad in the Negev Desert, 16 miles west of the Dead Sea. He describes the whole town is out on the street partying, exactly like the one in Brazil. And this also includes a queen of the heaven who taught the ancestors that she's the mother of civilization. So he's a specific example of two places, one in the Middle East, one in the Brazilian Amazon, and they have the same story. And he said this town is having a fair, same deal, and it's close to Jerusalem. And he said it's not in our time. It's from the 7th century BCE, before the Common Era, BC, before Christ. Old way, new way of saying it, same thing. So the 7th century, roughly 600 years before Star of Bethlehem and all that stuff. So this story is identical to the one in the Amazon. You just change the names of the people and the places. And here in the Middle East, the Queen of Heaven is not Mary, the mother of Jesus. That hasn't happened yet. But she's called Ashera. It tells the same story of authorities breaking up ancient cultural religions, literally breaking statues, breaking altars, in an effort to erase the memory of this Queen of Heaven, Ashera. But it lives on in people. It's hard to deny people their belief systems. And in the stories in the Bible, they reflect this ancient belief system. And specifically, because this guy's like a biblical scholar, he cites Kings, the book Kings in the Bible. And when Paul takes the story apart line by line, the accepted conventional story changes. So what he does is he goes back and he gets the most original version of the Bible that he can get. And it doesn't seem to matter much what language it's in because he knows them all because he's a linguist. And he starts parsing line by line. This is the way it's been interpreted today, but this is really what the original intent was. So it tells about the Israelites not liking Yahweh, and because Yahweh was mean, and that was the big God. So the Israelites were worshiping other powerful gods. And talks about a building in high places, building some structures in high places in honor of these other gods. And they erected stones all over the country in honor of these other gods. So it was mainstream Jewish practice at the time to build temples and stones to the powerful ones everywhere they lived. Not what has been told to us about Yahweh. So we've been led to believe there was this one God, and that was their God, and that was, thou shalt not have strange gods before him. Well, it's hard to have some gods before you if the gods don't exist to put before you, and they existed, and there were plenty of them. It was normal and ubiquitous for them to worship, for example, Ashera, the Queen of Heaven. That would be called a goddess. The biblical narrators tried to paint a different picture. So there was an agenda behind what they put in the story and what they left out of the story. Paul was shocked as a member of the church, a pastor, and a teacher of the religion, how so much was intentionally changed. They had disparaged Yahweh. Their memory of Yahweh was negative. He was gone over good riddance. Ashera was revered and positive. So he was shocked to find out that the real people were not into Yahweh. They were into Ashera, this queen, this benevolent queen. It's not the story that the church tells. Paul had always been taught that for the Jews, Yahweh was the only God. So he now saw that they didn't even consider him a God. So who was he, and why did they regard him so negatively? He says that speculation is that Yahweh was the male half of a couple, Ashera being the female half. And actually, he said there were many gods, and this is far from conventional Christianity. It's far from the understanding of what he was taught as an Anglican priest. Certainly far from what the modern Bible would want you to think. And he said he couldn't talk with his peers about this in the church because they would have freaked out. So while he was finishing the other book before this, Escaping from Eden, he heard about a controversial Italian Bible scholar who had the same idea that Paul was beginning to embrace. And he was in a big controversy for his books on Bible translations because he did not agree with the conventional translations. This is this Italian Bible scholar. So Paul and he are going to get together. He and Paul, and now we, will have cause to question our assumptions about the Bible, life, and the universe once a more accurate translation is presented. So chapter 3, coffee, councils, and thought control. We're in Rome in 2022. And he describes Rome and the vibrant nightlife and does a really good job. And he describes the traffic cop, and I don't remember this story. This will be good. He says, as I drive my family towards a Piazza di Spagna, my attention is caught by a female police officer. She's patrolling the streets to control the flow of traffic through an area full of pedestrians. From underneath, oh, I do remember this. From underneath her police cap hangs super long tresses of curly blonde hair, and as she walks across the cobbles toward the car in front of her, I can't help but noticing her super high heels close to stilettos. This is not how traffic police dress in England, where I grew up, nor in Australia, where I live today. Evidently, it is how they dress in Italy. Yet, however impractical her footwear may appear to be, this police officer is having no trouble stopping traffic. I have to laugh because this is something I mentioned quite a bit, having had the great good fortune a long time ago now to go to Italy. The female police are just done up. They're beautiful. Their hair is impeccable. Their makeup is impeccable. They all have super long nails, and they're usually bright red, you know. It is hilarious because we're kind of conditioned into thinking of female police as kind of asexual in a way, given our conventional triggers for like what constitutes femininity. It's really funny when you first see the women who are police there, because they really defy our stereotypes. It's very funny. And not in a ridiculing way, funny, laughing at us. So anyway, so he describes this traffic cop, and he says that this is really Rome, you know, despite the fact that, you know, they defy convention with their appearances. Rome, Italy, center of orthodoxy, and really in the forefront of the battle against the controversy of all of this, despite all the great things. He remarks that half a mile away, Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake for saying that there was life on other planets, and that ancient techniques and protocols can help us access higher cognitive function. So what's just talking about planetary relationships? He was burnt at the stake for challenging our understanding of consciousness and reality. This really freaked them out. And it was done as an example. It got Da Vinci's University of the Sciences shut down. So he was made an example of. It was terrible. It got Galileo and Copernicus to retract their ideas. Galileo was put under house arrest. So controlling the minds of the masses is big business in Rome, and has been for a very long time. Some things decreed in Rome in the 1200s, for example, the genocide of 1 million Cathars in the south of France. They were a sect, a religious Christian sect that were very non-conventional. They were almost like a little bit like, I hate to use the word because there's so much stereotype associated, a little bit like hippies, you know. They were much more into gender equity and free love, but they had big philosophical differences with the traditional Catholic Church, and they were a challenge to the hegemony of the hierarchy of the church, and they wiped them out. Also, Rome decreed the slaughter of thousands of Central and South Americans, the religious priests and the kings, and the burning of vast libraries to destroy their culture. 99% of all writing about the indigenous people of Mexico, 99% was destroyed. So the church is also responsible for their mandates for global regime changes. They get all up in the politics of various areas. And now he says his host, Mauro Bellino, is a radical scholar. This is the scholar and priest in the Vatican who disagrees with the conventional translations. So he tells how religious thought control is still continuing to have this conversation. Mauro wrote the Naked Bible. He worked for years as a translator of the Bible and finding Hebrew meanings for interlinear Bibles for the Vatican. So he was like the official translator, linguist for the Bible, for the Vatican. And over the decades, he was praised by the popes, by the Vatican hierarchy for his meticulous work, his accuracy, his knowledge. And eventually he was able to convince a publisher to leave the words for Lord and God untranslated in an edition. Now, we go into this, like I said, I kind of gloss over the linguistics, but Elohim, Ruach, Elyon, Yahweh, he wanted to get to the real meaning of these words and go beyond the theology and just actually get to when people spoke these words, what did they really mean? His publisher approved because the publisher was kind of a language nerd, and he was more loyal to the text than he was to any accepted interpretation. And his client, unfortunately, was not. His client was the Vatican. So they forced the publisher to translate it the way the church preferred. And Mauro quit because he recognized this wasn't intellectually having integrity. This is one of the most significant moments of thought control in history as far as he was concerned. His work has spread, and it's opened a world of cultural memory that was recorded in the Bible but hidden from the public by editorial decisions 26 centuries ago. His translations of root meanings reveal that earlier Bible information was very different from what the church presented. And Paul talks about in 2022, he did a show on the Fifth Kind television, and it's on YouTube. You can watch it. And they made a video together, and their video conversations received millions of views and responses of people who actually agreed with them, people who were linguistically in the know. So now they're meeting for the first time. This is what this is about. And Mauro tells Paul about Joseph Garbini, a professor of Semitic philology at Sapienza University in Rome. He told Paul, we do not read the Bible guided by grammar as we should. What we're doing is we're reading the Bible guided by ideology. We're interpreting it to suit our narrative. Elohim is singular God, but it's not in singular form, and it's usually used with plural verbs. So in the accepted conventional Bible, Elohim is considered singular, but in the ancient language and the words they use around it, everything is plural. There's more than one. They're talking about more than one God. And the behaviors attributed to Elohim exhibit behavior of plural gods interacting with each other. So Paul had noticed this when, years ago, because he's a linguist, and he felt there was a plurality of gods and not Yahweh all by himself. But that's not what they want us to believe. He recognized that words were manipulated to get a text that was conforming with church dogma. The Bible originally was about Paleo-contact, he believes, and it was tweaked to read about God. In Hebrew, there's no word for just one. It's omnis, all. omniscient, omnipotent, transcendent, spiritual entity, but not God. And these are subtleties of language that are in the book that are just so hard to go into. But this fact is well known by publishers and biblical scholars, that they're playing fast and loose with the wording to abide by the narrative they want people to believe. So what he's saying is that if you go by the language of the ancient, actual physical first primary sources, Elohim is not God. It means a wide diversity of beings, some good, some bad. Watch the clock here. The root means the powerful ones, plural. So the Bible is not God's book title. It's the book about the wide range of powerful ones, good to bad, would be a more accurate title. The Elohim, the word, has been translated as judges or legislators or governors, the bright ones from above, or more. Abraham and Sarah were from a place called Ur. U-R was a city. And when they left there, they brought with them to Mesopotamia stories of the sky people, and the sky people genetically modifying the first humans. And, you know, if you are interested in this kind of mythology, a really good resource are the books of Zecharia Sitchin. I'm not so much into mythology. I am Greek and Roman, even Irish mythology. Mythology only is of interest to me in as much as it possibly reflects actual historical events. Some people really love mythology, and if you're one of those people, you will love the books of Zecharia Sitchin, because it's all about how these guys came from outer space and came to ancient Sumeria and fought with each other and genetically created hybrids that became the human race. And it's very interesting, all in the context of these ancient civilizations. Very, very interesting. And these are all on clay tablets. It's, you know, the original source. Sarah and Abraham moved to Canaan because the powerful ones told them to. The Bible envisions an empty universe with only one God and the people on earth. But the true translation, if you go back into these original sources, the earth was a project governed by a federation of divine beings, what you would call a sky council. And the Bible makes a whole lot more sense with the original Hebrew words or root words in place, so that you understand the true meaning of it. All of a sudden, things that seemed not logical begin to make sense. It changes stories to resolve many moral questions relating to disturbing behavior of Elohim, brutal, anti-human, vengeful behavior. When you interpret the words as they're meant to be read, suddenly there's more of an understanding of what's going on. This behavior is not about God, the all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing. It's about a spectrum of ET visitors, invaders that slaughter thousands of people on the earth. It's a story with no sense if you only use the word God. Now, let's make it clear here, just for the sake of argument, he's a minister. He's not denying or confirming the existence of a God or gods. He's saying these stories are not necessarily what they've been purported to be about. And the narrative has been changed so that the people at the top of the hierarchy can continue to be in charge, basically. He says it's really clear that these stories in the Bible are exactly the same as the stories from ancient Mesopotamia, from Babylonia, from Sumeria. Top biblical scholars are still struggling with this. This is really defiance of conventional belief. And he said, when you get down to your hometown ministers, the guy in the church down the street, they have no idea that any of this debate is going on. But at the very top, there's a huge tug of war over what do we want to allow people to believe. One theologian, Michael Heiser, hope I said that right, he tried to explain it away, but no amount of hoop jumping changed the meaning of the words that were used in the biblical tablets, the ancient actual physical scrolls and tablets and stuff. You can't deny that that's what was written down by the ancient people themselves. If you go directly to the source, the narrative changes. Both the Bible and these ancient tablets say that the world was created when the wind separated the sea and the land. Both talk of disagreement about how to make humans, not like God, but not too much different. They wanted to get a good mix, right? They both of these sources limit human abilities, human lifespan, and a lot of this is done with genocidal floods. People get too big for their britches, or people become uncontrollable. Well, what's the solution? And these large flood events that are almost existential, they're way more than one. Let's put it that way. The original agenda was to push monotheism in the Hebrew canon, and the first redaction of the primary sources. So the first time that they really started to tweak the original ancient primary sources was in the 7th and the 6th century BCE. They wanted to erase the memory of ancient visitors that were part of the indigenous cultures. So there's this list, and I'm just going to gloss over it. It was way too much to write, but I'll quickly talk about it. So in the book of Job, there's these beasts with which Yahweh compares himself, like they're unequal, but he's comparing how awful he is compared to them. In various places, seraphim or serpents, fearsome dragon-like entities exist. In fact, the Bible uses the words serpent and dragon interchangeably. In the book of Leviticus, we read of Moloch's offerings. These child sacrifices are condemned by the narrators, but who or what were they being offered to? In Genesis, the Bene Elohim, the watchers of the book of Enoch, and the gods of Greek and Norse legend play a diverse role. On the one hand, nurturing and tutoring humans, and on the other, abducting human females for hybridization. Throughout the Bible, we have Baal generally mentioned in the context of competition for resources and hegemony. Who or what is he? In 2 Kings, we have the scenario of separate human colonies governed over by competing Elohim. The text reveals a bitter rivalry between Yahweh and the neighboring Elohim of Ekron. It goes on to talk about that. Then we have a glimpse also in Kings of the machinations of the Sky Council, noting that one of its members is described as a spirit. It's in the Bible. In ancient times, this word did not necessarily mean an immaterial or energy-based being. It implied a being that could spirit itself instantly from one location to another and disappear without leaving a trail. And we're going to come back to this. Then we're told the plural visitors to Jacob in Genesis are beings which arrive on earth and disappear back into the sky via the mystifying form of technology which the narrator describes as a ladder. And finally, we have Ashera, the nurturer of human civilization, and the mother of farming. So all of this reflects a wide range of powerful superhuman type beings. Paul took 33 years of preaching and studying the Bible and being an expert in linguistics to get to this realization. He did all the hard work for us, so now here we are. He saw that the original Bible had been changed, and it actually spoke to the Mesopotamian texts and the ancient mythology if translated properly, accurately. He had to admit the original text told of, and this was hard for him to admit this, consider who he was and the position he held, and his desire to maintain the respect of his academic peers. He had to admit that you cannot argue with the fact that the original texts say that the planet was colonized by ETs, we were created by them genetically, we were dominated and enslaved and were collateral damage in their conflicts over Project Earth. The Sumerians tell us of being engineered to be a controllable workforce. Female entities taught us culture and nurtured our development. And that was a more positive experience. So, there was a different relationship between the human hybrids and any one of these beings that you would pick. In the Bible, Yahweh is ruthless, a conqueror, very primitive, very impulsive, and Ashera is life-giving and nurturing. The yin and the yang, almost. Male contact makes slaves and fighters, and they fear him. They sublimate our will to him, to Yahweh. Female contact with this god, female gods having contact with humans, see humans as valuable, and they try to give us knowledge and help us build civilization. So are we valuable or are we chattel? What are we? The female side of the story is marginalized and distorted. You just don't really hear it much. There's a deliberate change towards the universal language in all global mythologies to a dominant male god. So Paul got a letter from a reader telling him that we should trust biblical authors because they're inspired by spirit, and that Ashera is a silly story and not relevant to monotheism. So he just wanted to mention that that's the letter he got. So he goes to Palestine to check out artifacts. This is before Gaza, and so it's hard to even talk about it, but here we are. He goes to Palestine. Chapter 4, a doll and a doorway. He's in Nablus, Palestine, in the plain, very stormy plain in the mountains of Samaria. And in 1940, there was a 45-acre archaeological site that was excavated by the French, and it gives us a look into the physical realities of biblical times. It gives us insight into the mind of our Hebrew ancestors. For example, they found a carving which was a clue to Ashera. Similar findings across regions, and this region specifically, means that this devotion to Ashera was widespread, and it's often found today at Tel Arad at the harvest festivities. And in the Iron Age, homes that were found in ancient Judea, they found iconography to Ashera. She's a standard image in the Jewish homes of that time. It was mainstream. It was common to believe in her. And by far the most popular figure, obviously depicted with great power, often referred to as the Lion Lady. Around the same time in Iraq, Gilgamesh was a hybrid of sky people, and ancient carvings in the Louvre show a male lion being held relative to a huge lion. And there's just this, the imagery he's talking about that's actually even in the Louvre comes from Iraq, but also comes from Palestine, and also comes from Sumeria. And Ashera, in some of these figures, is shown naked with two lions by the ears. He makes the comment, female power. Her temples and places to honor her were widespread. King Solomon in the Bible erected a special temple in her honor. In the Bible. Jacob erected stones at the time, at the site of his close encounters that he had, and later King Jeroboam, I hope I said that right, erected a temple to Ashera at Bethel, in the place where his encounter happened. Excuse me. I lit the fire today and got a lung full of smoke. Bronze Age arrowheads have been found near Jerusalem that talk about, they're engraved, son of Anat and the servant of the Lion Lady. References made to her. There are many different ancient inscriptions naming Yahweh and Ashera side by side as peers. Neither one is dominant. They're mentioned on inscriptions together in pottery, figurines, inscriptions, and some theologians dismiss it by saying that Ashera is not really there. Some say, oh, that's a pole, or some say, oh, that's a doll. They don't want to believe that this is a significant entity. Asherah's prophets in Kings mentions 400 plus messengers for Ashera. So obviously, some communication from an intelligent entity, mother of the gods, some powerful female entity, there existed and was referred to, and he talks about Astarte and Hathor and Ishtar, all sort of depicted with Yahweh in equal power under whatever name the mythology of the area calls. Ashera is not airbrushed completely from history, he says. She's found in art and historical cultures of Egypt and Greece as Aphrodite, in Rome as Venus, as the olive tree in Orthodox churches. The symbol, that's what it stands for. Ancient Judaism is attached to Paleo-contact. Back in Kings, there's a disdain for Yahweh, his religion, his law, and his power, represented by the high priest. So to destroy ancient knowledge, the King Josiah sent in an army to remove polytheism. And they actually fought a war over this. And I can't read this writing. Linothism. I can't read the writing, but he's talking about the fact that in a lot of these cultures, they had a head god and then a lot of other gods around the head god. But the head god was not the only god. Josiah was a monotheist. He believed that Yahweh was the only God. He wanted a kingdom to be a theocracy with Josiah as God's vice regent. He removed the use of shamanic substances, facilitating spiritual encounters. And so we know about ayahuasca, for example. Not in the Middle East, but we know that's the kind of thing they're talking about. And things that provide an altered state of consciousness to allow for mystical experiences. Some priestly castes and prophets had this knowledge, and they were the only ones allowed into the inner sanctum, the sanctum sanctorum of the temples. So why Josiah destroyed the temples and desecrated the sacred areas was to help to get rid of the knowledge. He destroyed anything that had anything to do with anybody except Yahweh. The ancient narrative of the Harvest Festival described the continued reverence for this female powerful god Ashera in that time that continued, and that they honored visits from an advanced non-human until monotheism was shoved down their throats. A century after Josiah, the Hebrew scriptures were reformed to take out any references to all gods but Yahweh, especially Ashera. were manipulated to embrace monotheism and reject polytheism. And so this is not a controversial thing in academic circles. They agree this really did happen. This is historical fact. The most ancient stories are all of the sky people, as in ancient Mesopotamia and their origin stories. So scholars agree. It's the local pastors who would just freak out, you know, if you tried to talk to them about this, because they haven't gotten caught up. They haven't been read in to the admission of the people who know what the ancient books are. The books of Moses authenticate Yahweh and extinguish the stories from Abrahamic Elohim stories. The Pentateuch, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and that's where all this stuff derives. Other books were added and fused, and some national history and law was put with it to authenticate what they were trying to push. And you got what's called the Davidic monarchy, with a Levitical priesthood. So the Levites were the priests. This is under King David. It's a monarchy. It's also monotheistic. They wanted to legitimize the monarchy, give the high priests authority, say that everything was divinely instituted, and then they added the books of the minor prophets all together as the Hebrew canon. So this is the evolution of the manipulation of the Bible. Don't think I'm going to go much farther here. Let's see. The earlier form was a melange of ancient cultural memory, Yahweh prophets, Mesopotamian narratives, and the cultural memories of contact with ancient helpers. But that was too many gods. And they edited it, and this was logical if you take into consideration that they were monotheists and they wanted to push that. It's about retaining power, concentrating power at the top. And so they told everybody that Paleo-contact was idolatry. Oh, I can read this handwriting more clearly. The idea of one major God. The 10 Commandments talk about this as henotheism. Have no other gods before, no other Elohim before the big God. This is a hint of the ancient reality before the one God of orthodoxy. It kind of slipped in. No other gods before me. Well, how could you have other gods if he was the only God? It's kind of a backdoor acknowledgement that, oh, well, they did believe in other gods. So this new and reformed scripture changed the ancient beliefs of Judaism beyond recognition. So they cherry-picked what suited them. They reworded what didn't. For one major thing, the new version completely changed the attitude towards Ashera, you know, the female goddess. And I think I'll stop here because it really does go on quite a bit. It's a long, long chapter, and I hate to disrupt the narrative partway through an idea. So we're going to end here for video 1. And we'll start video 2 at the end of this, towards the end of this chapter, because there's quite a bit more. And, okay. I hope you like this. I find this really interesting. I hope it appeals to other people. It's intellectually really interesting. Historically, there's a little bit of storytelling in there for people who really like mythology and that kind of thing. And it challenges us to ask, why do we believe what we believe? Love Paul Wallis. He's such an interesting person. Check out The Fifth Kind TV on, I think it's on YouTube. Maybe it's on Gaia Television, and there are little bits. I don't have Gaia, but there are little bits of it for sure on YouTube. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be back. Slán go fóill, slánte.